सो हे प्रेम, आज हम लोग चालू करने वाले हैं विद आवर डिजिटल नोट्स. वी विल स्टार्ट विद द 12th high weightage easy chapters, and the first one we are going to start with is human reproduction. Okay, so human reproduction is a chapter that we are all familiar with. So let's just start with the basic concept, which is basically there is a boy and there is a girl. Boy releases semen and she just has the egg, which is called ovum and in future called as the ooted, and that's it. She just has that work, and of course a 9 month gestation period for creating the baby. Now semen has two things. It has secretions from the body, of course from the body, and it has sperm, also called as spermatozoa. So this is an important thing, this is an important thing, or this, whatever you want to call it. So what basically happens is we can show you that, for example, we have a, let's just make a randomized diagram for the sperm, and we have some kind of egg. So this is the sperm, this is the egg, N. By the way, what are these called? These are gametes, and the formation of this is called as gametogenesis. What do? They meet, form the zygote. Zygote is 2n. Why? Because of course n plus n is 2n. So what I want to emphasize here is the fact, and then the zygote mitosis, it does not undergo mitosis, but actually undergoes a process called as cleavage, which is basically mitosis. But the difference between cleavage and mitosis is that mitosis has growth period, whereas cleavage does not have a growth period, which means that for mitosis, if a cell looks like this, it will grow to a nice size, and then it will divide into its original size, which is basically this and this. But in the case of cleavage, this is mitosis. In the case of cleavage, we basically have this, which divides into smaller parts, which divides into more smaller parts, because they just don't have time for growth. So that's the difference between cleavage and mitosis. What zygote undergoes, and the thing it forms is morula. So it forms the thing it forms is that basically it's a zygote which divides and forms two. And what are those two things called? It is called as blastomeres. And then it's basically 2 blastomeres, 4 blastomeres, 8 blastomeres, 16 blastomeres. And morula is the 8 to 16 blastomere stage. It is the 8 to 16 blastomere stage is called as a morula, which in turn at the end forms the blastocyst. And that is basically going to be more than 16 blastomeres. And then we have the trophoblast, we have the inner cell mass, and basically that's just what happens. And then we will undergo implantation, the gestation period of 9 months, and then we have the parturition, which is the delivery of the child, and then child care. Basically it's just all the basic stuff. Now let's talk about the male reproductive system, since we already now have a complete gist of the chapter. Okay, on the next page, so we have the male reproductive system. Pretty easy stuff actually, so nothing really that hard. The one thing which I would say is that might be a little difficult to understand is that there is, like, imagine this is a testicular lobule. So there are a total of 250 testicular lobules, and inside each testicular lobules there is 1 to 3 seminiferous tubules. So in this case I will create 3, and inside these seminiferous tubules is where the formation of sperm begins. So let's understand how is a sperm formed, some basic concept. So let's start with the first phase, which is called as spermatidogenesis. So spermatidogenesis is basically when the okay, so let's continue. So I was talking about seminiferous tubules, that is basically 1 to 3. In the 250 testicular lobules, we have 1 to 3 seminiferous tubules. Lord, I just got confused. So inside seminiferous tubules is where the sperm is formed, as I talked to you about that. So let's talk about the first step. We have the primary phase, which is the spermatidogenesis. Okay, so in this stage, basically the most basic form of a sperm, that is called as spermatocyte. Spermatocyte, of course 2n, undergoes mitosis and increases itself in number. That is basic. But now sometimes they are like, I want to be naughty, so some of them think about, nah, I want to undergo meiosis. And the ones that think about that they want to take this step in the future are the one called as the primary spermatocyte. And these are also called as male germ cell, plus you can call them as male germ cell or spermatocyte, your wish. And these are 2n. So they will undergo meiosis 1 and form 2 people. Meiosis 1 is reductional division, so this will be n, this will be n, and then the meiosis 2 will happen. So now let's just make some more circles. This is a equational division, so they all are going to be n. So this is a primary spermatocyte, secondary spermatocyte, and these are they are either spermatid or spermatozoa. These are spermatids. Okay, and now this is the entire process of spermatidogenesis. Now let's talk about the next process, which is spermiogenesis. In this, there is an actually interesting thing, that our body at puberty, our hypothalamus secretes GnRH, which stimulates the pituitary to release LH and FSH. So we have LH, which goes for the Leydig cells and just basically stimulates the process of the formation of androgen, which in turn basically controls everything. So you can remember this by L, whereas the FSH acts on the serotoli cell, which is again present inside the seminiferous tubule, and they together help the spermatids to form spermatozoa, which is also just called as basic sperm. So this is how the entire process works. So that is why this all begins after we hit puberty. And then after the spermatozoa or the sperm is formed, they basically, we all know, they look like this, something like that. They will move towards the sertoli cell. Now the reason is going to be nourishment, because they need energy. They are just formed, and then when they are ready, when they are completely nourished, basically you can say, they will come out of the sertoli cell. So we can imagine like a food box, which is the sertoli cell, and just all the sperm gathered around it for food. And then once they think of it's time to move away in this direction, as for example, then this process is called as spermiation. So with the release of sperm from the sertoli cell, basically, or we can basically say the release of sperm from the seminiferous tubule, because after they come out of the seminiferous tubule, and that is called as spermiation. Now, the next question that comes to our mind is, what happens after that? Where do they go and how do they go outside our penis? Let's learn about that. So now we are at a pretty good start because now we know how sperms are formed. So now we will learn the entire travel path of sperm. It all starts from the rete testes, or the rete testes or whatever you want to call it. It starts from the rete testes and then reaches the vasa efferentia and then the epididymis and then vas deferens and then it enters the urethra as the ejaculatory duct and then comes out of the urethral meatus. So that is basically the entire pathway, as I'm pretty sure about it. Yeah. So we can just remember this pretty easily. Rete testes, vasa efferentia, epididymis, vas deferens, and then it goes to the urethra and then finally comes out to the urethral meatus. That's pretty much the entire pathway of sperm. And of course, along the way, the sperm undergoes maturization and also it receives some secretions from these, and that is called as a seminal plasma, and then together they are referred to as semen that we secrete out. So that's done. This is basically the gist of the entire male reproductive system. So now let's jump towards the female reproductive system. Okay, so let's start with that. Now, unlike the male reproductive system where our body just continues to undergo mitosis and the male germ cell or the spermatocyte just continues to increase in number by mitosis, females do not have that liberty, as we can say. When they are an embryo, or we can say fetus, a couple of million oogonia are formed inside their body, and that is basically the entire oogonia that they are going to have for the rest of their life. So what did I just say? A couple of million. So like we can imagine 2 to 3 million or something like that. A couple of million oogonia are formed. Oh, I just made a mistake, I think. The mistake is that it is not called spermatocyte. It's called spermatogonia, and the ones that decide to undergo meiosis are called as primary spermatocyte. So that's like it's a minor problem, so it's all right. Let's continue. So a couple of million oogonia are formed, and then we can expect the child to be healthy. It will become a baby. It will go live his life till he reaches puberty. Now something interesting again happens in puberty. The hypothalamus secretes GnRH, and GnRH, which basically stimulates the pituitary to release LH and FSH, and due to this hormonal changes, the entire menstrual cycle begins. And one more thing to remember is that, as I just told you, that this is going to be the entire oogonia that is going to be formed in her entire life. And to be a more surprising fact is that by the time the fetus becomes a baby and then reaches teenage or whatever the age is, by the time they reach puberty, the couple of million oogonia are reduced to a measly 60 to 80k oogonia only. And now something more interesting, they don't just stay in the they don't just lie there like not doing anything. They enter the first stage of meiosis. So oogonia actually undergo meiosis 1, but inside meiosis there is, I think, the stage called as inside meiosis 1 there is prophase 1, and inside the prophase 1, in the stage diakinesis, they are arrested at this stage until they reach puberty, and then GnRH, LH, FSH and everything acts upon their body. Until that point, they are arrested in the meiosis 1 stage. So puberty occurs and everything starts. So now let's understand how an ovum is formed. So for that, we will have to make some diagrams. Okay. First, we have a oogonia. Pretty cool. There are 60 to 80k per ovary. So total we can imagine like 120 to 160k oogonia. Now, in this oogonia, if we add a layer of granulosa cells, this is called as the primary follicle. And now, if you add some more layers of granulosa cells, along with that, if you add something called as a theca, it's called as a secondary follicle. And if you add, and now if the theca arranges itself in a form of an internal and an external while also having an antrum. So for example, if this is the antrum and this is the external theca and this is the internal theca, let's just name it all. So these are the layers of granulosa cells. If this is the antrum, this is for example the external theca, and this is the internal theca, this will be referred to as the tertiary follicle. And it is at this stage, it is at the tertiary follicle stage where the primary, because even in the primary follicle or the secondary follicle, the egg inside is still arrested at the dikinesis stage of prophase 1 of meiosis 1. But in the tertiary follicle, it will actually complete meiosis 1 and form two things. It will first basically they form a polar body. This will be the first polar body, and this is the secondary oocyte. So what do these have? These have the primary follicle has the primary oocyte, secondary follicle has primary oocyte, but the tertiary follicle has now the secondary oocyte will having a first polar body. The significance of the first polar body is not known for now, and the secondary oocyte is the one that is called as the ovum, and that is the egg. Now after the tertiary follicle, it basically increases itself in growth. So after growing a little, some growth occurs, plus what did I just click? Yeah, plus there is another layer in the secondary oocyte. So if I make this, there is another layer while having a lot of layers of the granulosa, having a theca, having an antrum. But the significance here is that it has another layer here called as zona pellucida. And this is what you call as a Graafian follicle. This is the mature thing. This is the final product. This is a Graafian follicle, and then this ruptures at the time of the 14th day of menstrual phase, and then the egg comes out, and the Graafian follicle that has ruptured, the remnants of the Graafian follicle forms the corpus luteum, which secretes progesterone, and the entire phase continues just like that. Now let's talk about some titties, shall we? So if this is the body, let us make, what are these? These are titties, and they basically have two things. First thing, this is obviously a characteristic of a mammal, and they basically have two things. They have a fat and they have glandular tissue. So they have a certain amount of fat depending on their, I don't know, genes or something, and they have glandular tissue, which will be the one where the entire action will begin. So when you are pregnant, your mammary glands undergo differentiation, and by the end of pregnancy they start lactating, and that milk is called as colostrum, which contains the antibiotic IgA, which is essential for the baby, and that is why it's important to breastfeed the baby for the first few months of his basically life. Let's talk about the glandular tissue. The glandular tissue contains something called as alveoli. We have also talked about this term in respiration, but there is something again, alveoli, which is the one where the milk is stored. This is not where the milk is synthesized. The milk is synthesized somewhere else. For example, prolactin or something like that is the one that secretes the milk. This is the one that stores the milk. Oh, this is the one that stores the milk and secretes the milk, whereas something like prolactin would synthesize the milk, if I want to say. So what does this do? This secretes and stores, whereas the other things synthesize. This is not the one who is synthesizing the milk, just to be clear. So now we can just imagine this very simply, that we have a lot of alveoli which will join together to form. So if I refer to these as alveoli, then these will be mammary tubules, which will again join together to form the mammary duct, which will form the mammary ampulla, which will form the lactiferous duct, and then this is where the milk is secreted out by the baby. So this was the entire talk about the breast. Gametogenesis is done. Okay, so let's talk about menstrual cycle. So menstrual cycle is a characteristic of female primates. Okay. Oh, so basically it's like a period of 28 to 29 days. We shall take 28 days for consideration this time, and it is divided into 4 phases, to say the least. So let's just continue and just write everything for all of them. We first have the menstrual phase. Which is basically from day 1 to day 3 to 5. Okay, from day 1 to day 5. This is where the blood comes out. This is where the endometrium degenerates, and all the blood vessels and everything, they just basically break down. They degenerate because the egg does not fertilize, and hence it has to repeat the cycle once again. So that is why it degenerates and the blood comes out. So this is the phase for that, and this is also the time or the phase where the LH, FSH, estrogen, progesterone, they are all very low. Let's move on to the next phase, which is the follicular phase. Follicular phase lasts from like day 6 to day 13. Now this is the stage, the follicular phase is where the Graafian follicle again develops, because they are like, now we have to continue the cycle once again. So again we have the primary follicle, secondary follicle, tertiary follicle, and then we have the Graafian follicle. And then as the Graafian follicle is formed and as the primary follicle grows, the antrum, which is that thing we talked about, which is formed in the tertiary follicle, stores the estrogen, which is released out into the medulla of the ovary, and then it travels from there to the uterus and helps to proliferate the endometrium, which is then controlled by the progesterone that I will talk about later. Okay, now it is at this stage where our estrogen increases, progesterone increases, LH increases, FSH increases. But this is again the starting point where everything basically starts increasing. LH and FSH increases rapidly. Now let's talk about the next phase, which is ovulatory phase. Now this is just a single day phase where the egg will come out. the day 14. Now this is the stage where the LH attains a peak, and hence it is called as the LH surge. Progesterone is not really that high. Why? Because of course the corpus luteum is not formed, which secretes progesterone, and our estrogen is also high because LH and estrogen are kind of correlation, and FSH and progesterone have some kind of correlation. So LH is high, estrogen is high. So if I like show you from the diagram, we can say like if LH is like this, then progesterone is like this. This is LH, this is FSH. And if estrogen is like this, and progesterone is just flat line, it's not even that significant here, because for now the corpus luteum is not formed. Okay, and this is the ovulatory phase. And now what will happen? The Graafian follicle will rupture, the ovum will come out, the Graafian follicle will form the corpus luteum, and that corpus luteum will secrete progesterone, which is essential for the maintenance of the endometrium to maintain that proliferation. Who started it? Estrogen. And now who is maintaining it? Progesterone. Okay, simple as that. And then let's talk about the next phase, which is the luteal phase. And as I just talked about it, the Graafian follicle remnants forms the corpus luteum, which secretes progesterone. And it is at this moment where progesterone acquires a crazy peak, like it was flatlining, and then this happens, and then it will again go down because it will break down if fertilization does not occur, whereas estrogen will be something like this. It acquires a peak here, and then it goes like this. And then again let me just tell you one last thing. The luteal phase is from the start of the next day from the ovulatory phase. So from day 15 to day 28 or 29, and then the whole cycle will begin again. This okay, so let's talk about what happens after implantation. So we talked about the fact that how the blastocyst is formed and how implantation occurs. So basically the blastocyst is formed, it enters the uterus, the endometrium starts to differentiate, and then it basically covers up the entire blastocyst, and hence it is implanted. So at that moment we can say that the pregnancy is completely confirmed, because there is no way that it is getting out now. So let's understand how a placenta is formed. So simple as that. We have a blastocyst which contains an inner cell mass and the trophoblast. So here the trophoblast forms the chorionic villi, which are the finger-like projections, whereas the endometrium also forms the finger-like projections like these, and then they join together to form the placenta, which will be the connecting link between the baby and the mother. And now you will say that if the baby is formed from the inner cell mass, then what is the point of the trophoblast being connected to the endometrium if we need the nutrients to go towards the baby? So that is why a single cell from the inner cell mass, so like if example trophoblast is the green layer and we have the inner cell mass at the center, and we are, for example, inside the endometrium right now. So we can imagine like a finger like projection formed between them, so we can call this as placenta. And now a single inner line from a single this will connect with the placenta, and this will be called as the umbilical cord. And now during puberty, in the maternal body, the cortisol, estrogen, progesterone, thyroxine, and we have prolactin. These are some hormones that are increased multiple folds because it is needed for the fetal growth, for the metabolic changes occurring in the mother's body, and for the maintenance of the pregnancy. And then we just have some basic stuff, which is like what happens in the months of pregnancy. On the first month, the heart is formed. The second month, limbs and fingers, digits are formed. On the third month, the major organ systems are formed. On the fifth month, now the baby will have hair on his head, and also it will start to move a little. So like the kicks that the mother feels is during the fifth month. And then during the sixth month, there will be eyelashes and everything, eyebrows, eyelashes. And then finally on the ninth month, the baby will be released. And what happens when the baby is ready? So how do we know that the time is right? Like, how does the body know that the time is right? So when the baby is completely grown, and the body and the fetus both understands that it's time. So multiple hormones take part in a neuroendocrine mechanism, which is going to be oxytocin, which is probably the main here. We also have some cortisol and also some estrogen. And these three take part in this neuroendocrine mechanism and take part in the fetal ejection reflex. Where they will release oxytocin, where the body will understand that the fetus is ready, so it will release oxytocin, which will act on the myometrium, which is the middle layer of the uterus, and then it will start some contractions, which will stimulate the synthesis of more oxytocin, and then just this vice versa until the contractions become so strong that the baby is able to come out. And the placenta is also removed afterwards. And we already talked about lactation, colostrum. Let me just see if there is anything else that is remaining. There's some important stuff that I might have forgotten to talk about. Yeah, I mean, we can do this. Yeah, we can do just one last thing. Okay, so let's study this. Just one last thing. This is the female reproductive system, and for example, these are the ovary, the two ovaries on the lower abdomen. This is infundibulum, ampulla, isthmus, infundibulum, ampulla, isthmus. And this is where, for example, let's just make a dig. Oh, that it doesn't go that deep, don't worry. And for example, if it releases the white stuff. So now, as we talked about, this contains sperm and secretions. So the secretion will help the sperm to travel. So it will go from here to the entire body, while the entire female body is out here to kill this guy. He will travel. He will reach the isthmus and then the ampulla. And on the other side, the ovary will be fighting another war. The egg will be formed. He will come here. Infundibulum. Travel. Now in the ampulla region, they will form the zygote. blastocyst and everything, and then as the zygote is formed, they will again travel here, they will again travel back, and it is at this stage where the cleavage occurs. 2 4 8 16, the blastocyst morula is formed, blastocyst is formed, and then they go to a place and then just undergo implantation, and that is how the whole thing occurs. Yeah, to be honest, I think we are pretty much it. Yeah, that's it. Lovely stuff. A 5-page concept. The first page containing the human reproduction, the male reproductive system. The second page, yeah, this just keeps on going. And then the female. And then we talked about the menstrual cycle, about implantation, the series of events after implantation, and then the just some basic stuff. And yeah, that's it.